Hey everybody, Jake here at TrendSpider to go over the weekend video update after the first two pretty strong weeks of the year. Going into pretty much January at this point, we're definitely going into some resistance zones across the board that we'll touch on here in this video. And we'll start off with the broad markets, go over Bitcoin, and then go over individual names as we always do. And I'll start with SPY here. Daily chart is on your left, weekly chart is on your right. And a pretty strong week here for SPY. You can see here that the main thing that occurred this week was this gap fill that closed right around 396.31. And we actually had a bullish engulfing candle of yesterday's candle, Thursday's candle. I do these videos on Friday. So a pretty strong close to the week with this candle on Friday. But you know, the main area using simple horizontal resistance and support zones, you know, the next area would be this area above from 408 all the way up to around 412, which you can see here is just pretty much the September and December resistance that we saw back in mid-September and then early and then mid-December as well. So if we do continue up, that is definitely one area to watch. If we break above that, then you have your gap way up here around 420 to 421. But we still have a lot of ways to go before we get too deep into that. But on the weekly chart, you can see here that we also have kind of more diagonal resistance that pretty much everybody on Twitter and FinTwit has been talking about. So this is definitely going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy if we do break through it. You'll see a lot of market participants seeing, you know, this breakout. And really, you've got this inverse head and shoulders as well. Not really a very defined neckline. You almost have this diagonal zone acting as your neckline here. But all in all, you know, on the weekly chart, we'd want to see a close above around 404 next week to actually break out of this. And you'll see here that we've actually broke out of it, not on the Qs, but on IWM, which we'll jump into here in a second. Now the Qs, you can see here that we did have this SR flip that we were watching. SR flip is simply when previous support becomes resistance or previous resistance becomes support. In this case, the previous support from back in November and December became resistance, at least on Thursday. And then we actually closed right above this zone on Friday. So once again, a pretty strong look into the week ahead. And you can see here on the weekly chart, we have this huge falling wedge here on the weekly candle. And you know, yes, there's still quite a bit of time for this falling wedge to kind of play out. You could have price action literally going all the way to July within this area. But a lot of the time, if we do break above this just basic diagonal resistance zone above, you know, we would definitely be looking at a potential falling wedge breakout if we do continue up over the next month or two. Who knows, or even next week. But this has been a pretty big area of resistance as well. As we mentioned on SPY, a pretty similar kind of diagonal zone. So that area above is right around 293. So if we can really, you know, safely close above 295 on the weekly chart, you know, I think we could be looking at a falling wedge breakout and potentially, you know, a move to the VWAP zone above. And that's anywhere from around, let's make that a little smaller. I did 2.5 just to capture some of this price action here. So, you know, above, that's anywhere from around 320 all the way up to around 325. Now, there's a lot of levels that we need to get through before that, but you can see here that has been the main zone that we've had reversals at on these dead cap bounces, these kind of bear market rallies so far. So if we did break out of the falling wedge, then this all-time high VWAP zone with about a 2.5% offset would be your area to watch from around 320 to 325. And really, if you just look at this wick here, that's what I'm taking the 2.5%. I want to capture these wicks, these areas that actually moved intra-week above the VWAP, but we still held below it as a function of the weekly close. So those are your levels to watch. On the downside, if we just continue to, you know, maybe make new lows as we have over the last year, then your low down here is in the mid 240s if we do that in the next month or so. So those are your levels to watch on the upside and the downside. And I will mention there's like the smallest gap here on the Qs, and that fills right around 283.30. So you do actually have a little bit of a gap here above, and as I mentioned, around 283.30 is where you'd have that very small gap fill for the Qs. Who knows, maybe into next week. Now, IWM is one that, we could look at as possibly leading the market. One, we've got this symmetrical triangle breakout here over the last couple days. So on Thursday, you broke through it. Friday, today, we pulled back, retested the top of that zone, and continued to move up. And so now we're really at this, pretty much this resistance area that I brought up on SPY pretty much from mid-September, and then you had it in mid-November and then early December for IWM. And so that area, we tested the bottom of that area on Friday, but that area goes all the way up to around 190 or so, give or take. And 190 would be a psychological area to watch as well. So a little more room before we really get into what I'd call maybe caution flags until we can break and close above this area. But definitely 190 is the area that we want to close above to really keep the party going here on IWM. Now on IWM, this is really one of the main broad market indices that at least we cover in the weekend videos that is actually breaking out through this diagonal trend line that we have been kind of pointing out for every index so far. So the SPY, the Qs all have this diagonal resistance zone that pretty much originates from the all-time highs. And you can see here that we did break out on IWM. We have not broken out on the Qs or SPY. So that would definitely be something to keep in mind with that breakout. As always, it's almost to be expected that you get some type of retest of the breakout point and then continuation up, but we'll see what happens going into the next week. And same thing, if you want to throw a VWAP zone on this one from the all-time highs, you can see that this zone has been pretty helpful for at least short-term tops here. Back in March of 2022, we topped out and reversed there. Back in August, we topped out and reversed there. So if we do continue to move up, let's say 193 all the way up to around 198 would be your area of, let's say, caution above, simply because it has been a resistance zone in the past. Now, if we get above that, that could really start changing the status quo of the market and possibly, talking about maybe a new bull market emerging, but we still have some work to do to close on the weekly above this 198. And, psychological number being 200 is also going to be an area that we need to get above as well. But looking rather promising, and another one looking very promising and a huge start to the year is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is breaking out of all types of areas. So, the main thing that I wanted to point out here is this previous SR flip. So previous support becoming resistance, acted as resistance in mid-December. We finally broke through it this week, and you can see that we are breaking out. Now, what's also interesting is if you measure the volume profile pretty much since the start of this diagonal resistance line zone, if you will, we were able to move through this volume gap so fast. And that's exactly what a volume gap is. It's essentially a vacuum for price. So if there's not a lot of volume, not a lot of friction above, price can move very quickly through these volume gaps. So you can see here we went from one volume shelf to essentially the next volume shelf, which includes the point of control. The point of control is simply just that volume bar that sticks furthest out to the left. And so we are nearing a pretty important level here where a lot of people who may have started, buying in the 19 to 19.5 area before, the whole FTX debacle happened and we broke those lows, those holders are now back to break even. So do some of them take some profits? Some of them scale out. Some of them, take profits as they have it. If not, essentially just realize no losses anymore. This is definitely an area, and we're getting to the top of it. 19.5 is right around the area that really could be a hard area to get above. Now, if we do get above that, you just start using basic horizontal levels. This previous high that we saw from early November, that's around 21.5 or so. Anywhere from, let's say, 21.2 to 21.5 would be your next area to watch if we can get a solid break above this break-even supply zone. And then on the weekly chart, you can see kind of this breakout as well, going further back actually. So this actually originates in May of 2022, and then this one originates in August on the daily candle. So two diagonal breakouts just on different time frames and different originating points. But the one thing I'll mention here is this breakdown, this candle from May. You can see here, here's our green zone. This was your previous support. We broke through it. So this kind of changed the status quo. So we want to measure the VWAP from this status quo change in the market within the trend. And you can see here that this same area is also where price has reversed over the last several months. So if we get through, let's say 20,000 all the way up to around around 22,000. If we can get a weekly close above that area, that would be something that we have not been able to do since this candle occurred. So those are your upside and downside levels. Simply, a possible retest of this diagonal resistance zone. And same thing on the daily chart. So, easily pull back and retest, continue up. And that would be down here in the mid 18s. So all in all, breaking out, but you do need to always consider that breakouts do retest where they broke out from. So that is crypto, Bitcoin in general. There a lot of crypto names have moved a lot more than Bitcoin over the last 2 weeks, but using Bitcoin more of as a proxy for crypto at this point. Going into Apple, Apple's another one that's kind of right at that SR flip. So previous support over the last 6 or so months is now acting as resistance. So you can see here pretty much originating from late June. We tested this area multiple times, broke down through it in December here, pulled back. Now we're retesting that area. So if we can close above this zone, let's call it right around 135, that could definitely be interesting for a continuation up going into the week ahead. Now, on the weekly chart, you have your own SR flip. And that's the cool thing is you got these different time frames all showing, very similar levels that we need to get through. So your COVID low VWAP, that held over the last 3 weeks. We pretty much broke down intra-week through it the last 2 weeks and then tested it and continued to move up this week. Now, previous support here could act as potential resistance once we get to around 140 all the way up to around 145. So definitely not out of the woods yet. At this point, we're just doing a very textbook retest of your breakdown zone and then potentially lower. Who knows what's going to happen within the next few weeks. But if we did continue up, that would be about as textbook as you get for a breakdown retest. And then we go from there and see if we what kind of candle we get on the weekly. And then we take what's new and go from there. Tesla is another one that's pretty interesting here. So the main thing on the daily on the left-hand chart that I want to point out, you've got the November high is kind of where we want to measure the volume profile here. You can see that we're really just dealing with this huge point of control here. So the point of control, as I mentioned before, is just your largest volume node. When price is below this area or right at it, it's acting as kind of your break-even supply. So we did not actually close above it this week, but it looks like we're trying to start a base here. And really until we can close above this area, let's just call it 324. Before I had it around 123.25. Sorry, I said 324, 124. So if we can get above 124, I think that's kind of your trigger here. 123.25 was just a little short. So looking for definitely that break and close above 124 into next week for possibly a bigger move. Now, one thing that I found this week that was pretty interesting is if you look at the RSI and if you look at essentially the quarterly RSI, so we're looking at the 12-week RSI. So, there's 4 months, 4 weeks in a month. There's 12 weeks in 3 months, which is a quarter. So if we're looking at the RSI 12, we're essentially looking at a rough quarterly RSI for the year. And you'll notice here, we have only tested this area 2 other times, pretty much below 30 on the quarterly RSI. And both of those times, we had massive moves to the upside. So I think this one was around 90% within 8 weeks. This one here in June of 2019 was around 50% in 7 weeks. And so here we are here around 122 or so. That would put us, in the 150s or 160s if we got a similar move to what we saw previously when the RSI was this low on the essentially the 12-week RSI. So something to consider for the bull case. The bear case, if you can't get above this point of control, who knows? Maybe we go and potentially fill this gap below. We have a very, very small gap below that fills right around 114 or so. So that would definitely be your downside area to watch if we do get a reversal here at this point of control. Next one that we'll go over is ENPH. Get a little solar exposure here in the video. So one of the main things that I was looking at on ENPH is this recent kind of MACD curl. So, a lot of the time, the MACD actually really starts to move before the cross. The MACD is a lagging indicator. So a lot of the time, you'll actually see when price is curling, that's really when you want to consider maybe opening a position. Definitely not giving advice on when to do that, but I'm just sharing, like, a lot of the time, sometimes a decent part of the move has been made on this curl. So you can see here, back in October, we had this curl, and then we actually had the cross, up here. So we're pretty much at that same area now on the chart where the MACD is curling. We'll see if it actually does cross. But last time we did have a MACD cross, we did have a pretty strong move. We went from around 250 all the way up to around 340. So, similar move coming, we'll have to see, but definitely at least from the previous MACD cross, which isn't a ton of data, but just looking at the previous one, and if the market cooperates, this could be the start of a bigger move to the upside, at least in the short to medium term. Now, on the weekly chart, you can see here that we have this longer term support zone and pretty much almost a perfect bounce off this area. And we've tested this area, multiple times. So 1 back in 2020, 2 back in 2022 in February, 3 in May of 2022, and then 4, we're testing it once again. So pretty much a huge ascending wedge here on the weekly chart. Decent candle here to end the week with that weekly candle, and pretty solid setup going into the week ahead, with the markets looking relatively strong, at least as I mentioned, in kind of the short to medium term. Going into CVX, this is Chevron. Kind of look at a different oil name here this week, and I can't say I see this too often, where you've got this symmetrical triangle and literally price action waiting until almost the last candle to make a move. So if you want to have a kind of a trade idea going into the week ahead, where you're likely going to have a big break up or down, just draw this on your own chart. Remember, if you want to try out TrendSpider, you can. We do have the ability to kind of try it before you buy it. Whichever way this breaks and closes, it's more than likely going to continue in that direction. So we're at the apex. I have no idea which way this goes. We'll have to see. But definitely anticipate a big move depending on which way we go. And so there definitely are some levels that you could watch on both sides. So on the downside, potentially a retest of around 168 all the way to around 169.50 if we broke down. And then on the upside, pretty much this general area here, which was previous resistance back in November, back in pretty much throughout the month of November, and then we tested early December. And so those would be your areas, pretty much if we break down, then watch for 168 to 169.50. If we break to the upside, definitely watch from around 184.50 all the way up to around 186, all the way up to around 190, which is pretty much your all-time high here from November. So upside, downside levels are shown. You just have to wait for price action to see which way price breaks, and likely will continue from there. On the weekly chart, you can see this huge uptrend is still intact. You could probably even throw maybe something like this to show it's kind of maybe forming a little bit of a ascending wedge here, rising wedge, whatever you want to call it. And so we are kind of in the middle here. Not a lot of edge if you're just looking at, are we near support, resistance? We're not even near horizontal support or resistance. So kind of trading in a weird area right now, but use the daily chart as kind of your roadmap that we just went over, kind of for your upside and downside levels, depending on which way we break. Microsoft running into some pretty heavy supply here. So if we look at the volume profile, the volume by price on TrendSpider since the August highs, there's a lot of shares that are back to break even after dealing with the drawdown. So all of these shares here, anywhere from around 238 all the way up to around 243.50. When we moved down to 220, these shares were pretty much at a loss, unrealized loss. So now as the price gets back up to this area, some people may scale out now that they're back to break even. Some people may fully exit. Regardless, that adds at least short-term supply to the market and makes this a short-term resistance zone until we can close above around 244. On the weekly chart, not a lot going on here. I mean, we've pretty much been range bound now for the last 5 months. So until we can kind of get out of this channel, break to the upside or the downside, we're pretty range bound at this point. pretty much between, let's call it 220 all the way up to around 255. So, you do have a little bit higher here on the wick, but that goes to around 264. But for the most part, I would call this general area your range that you're trading in. So until we break out of that, not a lot of direction here for Microsoft, at least on the short to medium term using the weekly chart. That is all the charts that we have for this weekend. Hopefully this video was helpful. And if you do enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe. We do these about every 2 weeks. And remember, if you do want to give TrendSpider a shot, all of the information below in the video description is where you can check out more about the platform. And remember, this is a platform not only for analysis, but you can scan, you can backtest, you can do all types of different automated things, such as finding gaps. If you don't want to manually search through the chart to find gaps, all you need to do is turn on the gap detector, and you'll literally see within 2 seconds all of the open and closed gaps that we have on the chart, depending on how far back you look. So very helpful from an automation standpoint, from a scanning standpoint, back testing, alerts, pretty much everything you could want in an all-in-one kind of platform is what you get with TrendSpider. So reach out if you have any questions, hello@trendspider.com. You can reach out to our Twitter account just on Twitter @TrendSpider, and we're happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks so much. Hopefully this video was helpful, and have a great weekend.